Okay, so this video is geared toward people who wrote about, for their midterm essay, who wrote about Genesis or Job or both, and who are thinking about taking advantage of the extra credit opportunity to write, to revise the midterm essay for up to a letter grade of extra credit. So, the reason I'm singling out, why is she singling out texts? The reason why I'm addressing these texts specifically, or the folks who wrote about them, is that some issues cropped up with people writing about these particular texts that didn't show up with the other ones. One of the issues that cropped up would actually, ignore my trash in the background, I just realized it's on screen. Look, finals, okay? We are at that point in the semester. Anyway, the first part of what I'm about to tell you would be true with any text that people are really very familiar with already, that people have encountered in a bunch of other variants, right, like textual variants, that people have seen in other translations or seen in other retellings or whatever. It would be true with any text like that, and Genesis and Job just happen to be texts that a lot of people have seen other versions of, right? So it's not specific to their origins, it's just a lot of people have run into these before. When you are writing about a text that does exist in other variants and that you are familiar with from other places, if you're writing a literary analysis, you want to be very careful to limit your discussion to the actual text you have in front of you, the one that you have established you are going to discuss, this specific translation and this selection, not, other versions of it, unless you are specifically comparing and contrasting two translations or something. But people are not really doing that for this kind of, for a sophomore lit paper, okay? This is not a comparative literature course in which you go and look at two different versions. It's not that kind of class. And nobody tried to do that, so that's fine. But a lot of people were kind of implicitly relying on what they knew or thought they knew about these two texts, and that pulled in all kinds of terminology and stuff that is not located in these translations of either of those books. So one good example is that a lot of people referred repeatedly to God and Satan, and almost always in both of those, the actual translation says the Lord and the adversary or the enemy. You want to use the words that are actually on the pages that you have committed to discuss. You don't want to use additional terminology that's not shown on those pages. For the same reasons that you wouldn't want to call Achilles some other thing that he's not actually called in the text of the Iliad that we have, right? Or if you're looking at Hera of the White Arms and there are other translations that call her some other thing that render that expression differently, you want to stick to the way that it's rendered in this translation, right, for the purposes of your essay. So you want to call the characters on the page whatever these actual pages are calling them, and for the purposes of a literary analysis, all of these are characters on the page, right? So that leads me to my other point, okay? So this other point is maybe less relevant for people who are writing about texts that are familiar to them, but not, those are not sacred texts. Because one thing that I saw happening a few times was a tendency to drift into kind of a theological discussion, or a discussion that tried to talk about how God really is, or how our relationships with temptation or with a tempter really are. You can't do that, because this is a literary analysis. You can, the world that is on the page in this text, you can't extrapolate from it to talk about, nobody tried to do this with the Toimbo Coolie and tried to imagine what the Marigna is really like. Nobody tried to do this with the Iliad and, extrapolate from these pages what we should infer about our relationship with Hera. Nobody did that. But people did try to do it with Genesis and Job. You can't, because it's a literary analysis. You can make all kinds of claims about what's actually on these pages, and you should. And sometimes people were using, examples of poetics that are, really common in specifically Christian talking about pieces from the Bible, which is actually fine, as long as you highlight, that's what you're doing, right? You can say something like traditionally framed as, and then use the expression. Could actually work really well. But what you can't do is treat the text that you're examining here, Genesis or Job, differently from how you treat any of the other texts. That's what I'm saying when I say it's a literary analysis, not a theological essay, okay? It's not that there is kind of a line of thinking or a train of thought that says we shouldn't let students write about sacred texts that are like sacred in their religious tradition. And I don't really agree with that. First of all, because it's like there's no good way to monitor it, right? Like it leads to a situation in which either faculty are making really broad assumptions about their students' religious backgrounds, which is problematic, or faculty are demanding to know their students' religious backgrounds, which is really problematic, or it means that like in order to take that option off the table, we have to just like agree that we're not going to teach, like we're not going to include in our literature courses any sacred texts. Well, that's kind of messed up because these are some of the most powerful and transformative texts in human history. Like if any group of texts has ever been influential in the history of humanity, these are them. So it doesn't make sense to exclude them from analysis, right? But I don't care what your religious background is. I don't want to discourage you from applying literary analysis to texts that are sacred within your tradition. I have found that to be a productive exercise, okay? Like, it has been valuable for me. And indeed, I would think that if the skills of literary analysis are valuable at all, and I clearly think they are, right? Like, you can kind of tell from, like, what I chose to do with my life. If they're valuable at all, they are worth applying to the texts that really matter to you, whatever those texts are. But you can't treat the texts that are sacred within your religious tradition as differently from how you treat any other texts for the purpose of literary analysis in a literature course, right? Like, that doesn't work. So if you would not make an argument about what Book 18 of the Iliad says for your close personal relationship with Athena, then you can't make that kind of argument about what Job has to say about our relationship with the Lord either. That may seem like I'm being nitpicky or something. Maybe I am, but only in the sense that I really want you to nail the skills of literary analysis and be able to apply those skills to and apply those skills to any of the texts that we look at and be able to walk them out on the page within because there are limitations in any kind of analysis, right? Like there are some things that you're going to not do and some others that you are going to definitely do. Like, I want you to be able to set the parameters and within the parameters perform the analysis well. So that's all this is. If you have questions about how to do that, like if you are interested in writing, doing the revision for your midterm essay, and you aren't quite sure how to apply, like you hear what I'm saying, but you're not quite sure how to make it work on your page, let me know. I'll be happy to work with you. I've got a limited amount of time in which to do that, right? Because when we come back from Thanksgiving, like, I'm really hitting the ground running, so I can't really push that deadline back. But if you want to like make an appointment within the next, within the next half of a week or so, and talk about your essay, I'll be more than happy to do that with you. I would really like to see how your ideas develop as a result of that conversation and that engagement, and that working with like, okay, literary analysis, familiar text, how do I get this up and running? I think that could be potentially very valuable. So anyway, good luck. Talk to you soon.